It's 2025 and it's time to figure out if pulsing is a good thing in red light therapy devices. Now in 2023, I did a video on pulsing where honestly, I bashed it and I said it was a really bad thing. And then recently in the description of our videos, we allowed people to make suggestions for future content videos. And Jamie Stevenson asked, is there any new research that supports pulsing in red light therapy usage? So in this video, I'm going to unpack the latest research on pulsing in red light therapy and figure out whether or not I was wrong in 2023. So firstly, what is pulsing? Pulsing in red light therapy simply means that the device will switch on and off at a really high rate. So there'll be times when the lights are on and times when the lights are off. Normally, your eyes can't perceive this difference. Now, what's very interesting is when I started working with red light therapy products in 2019, pulsing was seen as a bad thing. Naturally, LEDs will flicker on and off at a really high rate, and we already knew then that this was a bad thing for your health. It caused a subliminal stress on your brain, could cause things like eye strain and headaches. So back in 2019, if you wanted to know if the quality of the device was good, it would flicker if it was a low quality, and it would have a driver installed and be flicker free if it was a high quality red light therapy device. And then around 2021, one of the most popular at-home red light therapy companies, which I won't mention, but you've probably heard of them before, came out with a range of devices that had this pulsing feature. Now, I must tell you, when this happened, I was quite afraid because we had just created a new MyLight range of devices. All of them were flicker free. And the scary part was there were scientific studies to back up this pulsing. And these weren't new studies either. They were actually really old studies. And then as soon as you started digging into those studies, the wheels fell off the wagon. So in the older research with red light therapy, they never used to use LEDs. They used to use lasers. Now, lasers pose a risk where they can overheat your tissues, especially when they use much higher light intensities. And what researchers found is that if you flickered the rate or pulsed it, then you would actually get better results because it didn't overheat your tissues. And this was the logic behind adding pulsing to red light therapy devices. Basically, you look at these really old studies where they use lasers and there's pulsing, they have better benefits, and therefore we can apply that to LEDs. Now, the problem here was that LEDs aren't known for creating as much heat in the tissue. And when you look at the older studies, they were using light intensities upwards of 2000 milliwatts per centimeter squared. That is around 20 times what you will get in any home red light therapy device these days. Now, there is one other reason why pulsing is often promoted as better than continuous wave light, and that has to do with brainwave entrainment. Now, I really want this one to be true, but the idea behind it is that if you pulse the light at the right frequency, that can change the brainwave states, and it sounds great in theory, and I really wanted it to be true, and that's also what I was looking for when I dove into the most recent research. So I went onto PubMed, which is the largest database of studies, and I wanted to see what is the latest research saying on pulsing. Firstly, I looked for any studies that were referencing LED devices using pulsed wave versus continuous light, and I found nothing. I decided that I didn't want to just stop there, so I wanted to look at newer research, even if it involved lasers. So I found a study, and this is a beast of a study. This study references 306 other studies, and it's titled The Role of Photobiomodulation in Modulating Neural Activity and Brain Function, a Systematic Bibliometric Analysis. Now, this study is so new that it hasn't actually been published yet. So it's set to come out in the Journal of Photodiagnosis and Photodynamic Therapy in October 2025. The date today is the 8th of September, so it's scheduled to come out, but it is available online. Now, this is a systematic review, so they're not doing one clinical study. They're gathering all the data available on a certain topic, and there's a few studies that are worth referencing in here. So the first one that popped up was referenced from 2019, and this one involved immunosuppressed rats. They were looking at wound healing, and they wanted to see with lasers whether pulsing had better effects than continuous wave. What they found is in this study, pulsing decreased the inflammatory markers greater than continuous light did. But we do have to look at all the evidence. So there was a study in 2023, this was a lab study, and they were looking at the proliferation and migration of human gingival fibroblasts. And what they found in this case was that both continuous wave and pulsed light increased the proliferation, so they made more gingival cells. These are the ones responsible for healing in our gum tissues. What they found though is that only the continuous wave light increased migration. Now, this brings up a very important point with the difference between pulsed light and continuous wave light. There are some downsides to pulsed light. If the light is switching on and off, your total dosage is going to be less. If you did 10 minutes of continuous wave and you did 10 minutes of pulsed wave, you're going to get essentially double the dose with the continuous wave. So what this study showed was that both of them increased the proliferation, more cells were made to heal the gum tissue, but the migration, so the ability to move those cells around, was only increased with continuous wave light. The next study that this beast of a study referenced was another systematic review. So another one where they're gathering data. This one was titled Photobiomodulation in Acute Traumatic Brain Injuries, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analyses. So traumatic brain injuries are concussions. And this study concluded that no differences were identified between pulsed and continuous wave modes. Now, I really like the idea of pulsed wave being better for your brain health, but there's another study I just want to bring up here, and that is titled Transcranial Photobiomodulation in Major Depressive Orders, Dose-Dependent Effects on MADRS Scores. Now, in this study, they found that compared to pulsed wave, only continuous wave light was able to improve symptoms in major depression. Now, what you've probably gathered so far is that we have some research that shows pulsed wave could be a good thing, and then we have other research that says continuous wave is better. And this brings up one of the most important factors in science. It is a principle. If you are a scientist, you know this. You are not meant to make clinical decisions based on isolated studies. Now, this seems to be a factor that is ignored by companies. They will cherry pick data. They will find one study that fits their narrative to use a new marketing angle. And the problem with research is that there's always confounding variables. So with all the research that's happening in red light therapy, if you want to find one study that fits a certain narrative, you can find it. And that is why these systematic reviews exist. They look at all of the data and they make a decision based on a large data pool. Now, the study I referenced in the beginning, the one that's still coming out in a month, they conclude and say, as a result, there is currently no definitive conclusion on the relative benefits of continuous versus pulsed waves. Thus, further investigation into the biological mechanisms of both modalities is essential to delineate their respective applications. What I will say is I am not 100% certain that pulsing is a bad thing. What I am certain of, though, is if I was to make the decision to add pulsing into the mitochondria products now, that would be completely irresponsible. That is not following the scientific method. Now, let's say 5 years from now, we have a whole bunch of new research which changes the trajectory of what the evidence is currently showing. And at that point, we see pulsing is definitely a better thing. We have systematic reviews with hundreds of studies where they all point to the same thing. Then I will go ahead and add pulsing to the mitochondria products. But the companies that are currently doing it now are not going to be able to say, I told you so. Because at this point right now, it is completely irresponsible. And the only reason a company would be adding pulsing now is to change their marketing tactics so they can make their product seem different to the others. And speaking about trying to stand out through marketing tactics, pulsing is not the only way that red light therapy companies try to stand out. There's another thing that is happening now with the number of wavelengths that they put into a red light therapy device. And I've covered this topic over here. So if you want to find out how many wavelengths you should have in a red light therapy device based on science, go and check out this video.